Wonder how many of you have ever had to write your performance review. You know, most of us, I think, in the corporate environment have a supervisor or a boss write it for us. They kind of, here's your performance review for the year. But as I got into ministry, I recognized that boards change over and people are there or not there. And I began to write my own performance review as a minister, what I had done over this past year. Because I found that what happened was I would become very focused on what had just happened. Now, my performance review was always, the deadline was February the 1st. Well, what had just happened? Well, the holidays had happened, and New Year's had happened, and the annual meeting had just happened. So all of that stuff was really in the forefront of my mind. And the most wonderful part of the entire practice was to sit down and go back a year and said, well, what was happening last February and last March and what was Easter like? Because it's so easy to forget what even just one whole year has to offer us because we're focused on and we're attentive to what's happening right now. And I can't help but think that that's probably really, really true about celebrating our 250th birthday. Right now, we're focused on what's happening right now, this term, this administration, or even maybe we might look back a little bit to a couple other administrations. You know, I was born during Eisenhower's administration, and that time capsule in our nation's history that we forget what we don't even know, not forget, we don't even know what is 250 years worth of history really all about? What have we done over these 250 years? What is it that we have to be proud of as a nation, as a people? What can we stand up and hold our heads high and say, you know, when we look back, we can see the trajectory of how we got here today, whatever that looks like. What is this legacy of the United States of America? And although this weekend we're celebrating the Independence Day, the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, that was unique in some ways, but not really unique. There were many countries over the course of thousands of years who had rebelled against a superior nation, if you will, a nation that had held them captive. And so the Declaration of Independence, although it was an amazing document in and of itself, what the real legacy is for you and for me and for this country was our Constitution. Now, the Constitution was finally ratified 12 years after the Declaration of Independence. But I want all of you to hear something that just really, it's just blown my mind the more I think about it. The document was formed as a model for something new. Now, I'm talking about consciousness. I'm not talking about legal laws. I'm not talking about the formation of government. What I want you to hear is that our United States Constitution moved the world from one track to another. There was no other document ever seen before that was anything remotely like our United States Constitution. And it was a model of representative democracy that the world had never seen. Now, think about that a minute. The consciousness that these people who sat down to write this document this was really high spirituality, if you will, because out of what model did they get the model? You see, this was a brilliant moment in time, in all space and time. Not only is the Constitution itself a tremendous legacy to us in terms of its consciousness, it's also a living document, which makes it so unique because our founding fathers, realized that although what is happening today in their today looked like this, down the road, they could not even conceive of what the world would look like. Certainly, we couldn't even conceive in the years that we've been alive, all the changes and all the dramatic upheaval we have seen. So, what they did, they made it a living document. You see, all the other countries of the world, I, King Alexander of Slovenia, tell you people you can be free. Somebody superimposed it upon the people of a country. But that is not true of the United States. It was a groundswell. It came from us up and created this document, which was meant to be a living document, which is called the Amendments to the Constitution. You remember when the Constitution was written, the very first lines are, or sort of, all men are created equal. Well, that was interesting because, of course, Jefferson and Washington all had slaves. The created equal was if you were educated, if you were wealthy, and if you were white, and of course, male. But our living document called the Constitution has amendments that breathe life into a growing conscious awareness that Black people are people, that women are people, that people who were born in this country are citizens of the United States. We don't have to have 4 terms for a president who is significantly ailing, as we saw with Franklin D. Roosevelt. We can change this document, we can morph, and we can grow because of it. So here is this consciousness that has moved the world from one track, one huge track, thousands of years, into an entirely different track. As a result, when we look at our report card, if you will, what happened since then? The manufacturing. The United States, because of its cohesiveness, because of its largeness, because of its resources, could manufacture like no other country in the world ever has, ever probably will. The inventions that we have seen that came as a result of all of our country's wealth in so many levels, education, opportunities, resources, all of that. The technical issues, the medical cures. And here's the thing about all of that. Remember, I said we moved to a different track? Well, our Constitution was the base from which all of that happened, and it helped our country, but ultimately helped the world. We began to see that our country was a haven for immigrants. We forget that almost all of us have come to this country as a result of coming to this country. And we saw our country was founded on the Pilgrims. What were they? Well, the short story is they were immigrants coming to Massachusetts. How about the Irish when the potato famine happened? Where would they go? Europe was experiencing all kinds of problems at that time. They couldn't have taken any more people, but America could. And what about the Jewish during the Second World War? We welcomed them too. So our country has always been a haven for immigration. We've been a champion for human rights, not only our own, which of course we've struggled with over the years, but also globally. We help to rebuild our enemies. This is profound. This is truly profound that we would extend to the ones we have just defeated the resources to be able to rebuild their country. Because what we saw was in World War I, we had a World War II because we did not extend our human compassion for another country. And so we see them, of course, the Marshall Plan in Europe, and then again in MacArthur's plan in Japan to help those countries rebuild after the Second World War. The World Health Organization, USAID, and all of these other associations to say all people are worthy of a life, really. I mean, babies were born an average age of 5 was kind of common. And what about the women who suffered because of those childbirths over and over and over again throughout the course of history because of the United States and all of our and I use the word resources and I mean all of it, were able to help lift up lift up in consciousness an entire world. And we've become champions of peace. I mean, let's face it, Woodrow Wilson started in after the First World War, the League of Nations, and it floundered and it didn't go anywhere. When Roosevelt came in and Truman to follow him, we see the United Nations being developed. We see NATO being developed. We see the other alliances with other countries. We have quantumly moved the world. We have quantumly moved the world. That's profound. Now, looking back, we're doing our report card after all. We've had a few missteps. We've had some big blunders. We've had a lot of mistakes, both internally and externally. We have faltered as a country. We have failed. And yet there have been times that not only did we succeed, but we quantumly succeeded in what we had created here because of that Constitution and that consciousness that brought forth those words onto a document almost 240 years ago. See, that consciousness is who we are as a nation. It's not just, well, things they argue about at the Supreme Court or whatever the president does or Congress does. Yes, all of that is embedded in the Constitution, obviously. But those words would never have had power had we not have had the level of consciousness to accept them. They would have been good words and said, you know, that's really nice. I like that book that you wrote, but it doesn't mean anything to us. It means something to us because it is us. It's not just about those people back there who wrote it, obviously it was in some degree, but it's also about those of us who live it today. We live that vision, we live that inspiration, we live that consciousness. See, and that this idea of amendments to the Constitution, hopefully what we realize is that the document can only come out of its space and time. And so each amendment is growing us in awareness, like the women's right to vote. 250 years ago, they weren't even recognized as people in many, many respects. And now we say, well, wait a minute now. Now we're going to say that women have the right to vote. So that shift, that awareness, and in our country, that awareness leads to that same awareness as it filters out throughout the world. An interesting insight when I was looking up this idea of constitution. I've just been really, really enmeshed in it these last couple of days as I'm watching all of the celebrations and stuff. And I think, you know, there's another definition to the word constitution. It's a phrase we don't hear so much anymore, but it's about our own bodies. Remember people saying, that person has a rugged constitution? I don't think they were talking about the Constitution of the United States. They were talking about their own bodies, this person's body. They are strong mentally, spiritually, physically, emotionally. So when we sometimes may struggle with this idea of the Constitution of the United States as being consciousness, perhaps we can look to our own bodies for some insight and inspiration. Our bodies are a sum total, right? They're spirit, body, mind, emotion, their heart, valve, lungs, limbs, muscles, tendons, it all has to work together. And we recognize that sometimes it doesn't work together all that well. But nonetheless, when we talk about our body, we say, this is my body. We're talking about the consciousness that is the sum total, and it can be amended over time. Think about that. The way we think about our bodies, the way we think, period, our beliefs, our habits, our ideas change. And so when we talk about our United States Constitution as consciousness, we can also see that mirror image in our own physiology. And perhaps maybe because our bodies, our mind or spirit is so closer to us than the Constitution of the United States, it helps us really appreciate on a whole nother level of what this document is all about. You know, our daily word today talks about that unity, that union that we all are. And as people of faith, I think it behooves us to get beyond the rhetoric of the legality of a written document, the laws, the rules, the regulations, and to step up into the realization that this document is a representation of the consciousness of people in our time, in our day, even as it was back then 250 years ago. You know, think about, what is the price of freedom? I've pondered this because, of course, of the holiday weekend. You know, and on one hand, I think what immediately comes to mind when you talk about the price of freedom is military service. And yes, of course it is. Or to serve in some public office. Also, it's the price we pay. That document said we have the right to bear arms, we have the right to defend the Constitution, we have the right to, and then the right to vote. Okay, so those are the price of freedom. But right now, at this point in time in my life, sound like something practical. Well, it's not practical for me to join the military. It's not practical for me to serve in Congress. It's not even practical for me to vote because right now, today, is not a voting day. So there's nothing I can do. But it is practical to be a goodwill ambassador. You know, we go overseas, and I tell you, we've seen some ugly, ugly Americans. How is that we are so entitled that we cannot see these people who are trying to be so pleasant and so helpful with just about next to nothing? And you're dismissive and rude and treating them like some sort of subservient, non-human or less than human people. See, if you want to be an ugly American, you can't travel with my group. Nope, don't allow that to happen. We are the ambassadors of this consciousness called the United States. We are those ambassadors. We're not waiting for somebody else to do it. We are all a part of this great experiment. It's not them a long time ago, although they're a part of it. And it's not in the future, well, them there, although they are a part of it. It is we. Isn't that interesting? That the preamble of the Constitution says, we, it really touches me. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, listen to the language, listen to the consciousness, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution. We, the people, our legacy to the future is how we stand today as we, how we actively and proactively work toward healing our division to understand that it's we, the people. It is not the separate entities and the money or the lack of money or the issues, any of that. Our Constitution, that takes care of all that legal stuff. But it is a consciousness that we have created. And we must live up to it and live into it for today and for our future generations to come. Thank you, and God bless.